Welcome to the Femsplainers. This is Christina Hoff-Sommers back from Portland.
I'm Danielle Crittenden, and Christina has been in Portland, and you've changed, Christina.
I know.
You're drinking triple soy light lattes.
Soy lattes, and I was with my very liberal, left-wing, vegan, vegetarian family.
During Kavanaugh week, you left me holding the bag.
Right, and I went off
on the Supreme Court hearing
week.
This is a
complete conspiracy against men. And then I was with my family, and I was indoctrinated, and I became a social justice warrior.
Well, I don't think you were indoctrinated. It's been a controversial
You're
week.
saying they're right. We watched it. And my 95-year-old mother is wonderful in every way and a great conversationalist, but occasionally a little delusioned. She said, Mr. Kavanaugh, people don't talk about this, but he murdered his little sister. And I said, okay, Mom, how do you... And she was insistent. And then I kind of Googled it.
She said, wait a second. Was this in the New Yorker?
It was Ronan.
I didn't see this.
So Mom thinks that. And how can I defend it? But anyway, I got back on the plane halfway to D.C. I started defending him. And then now, I don't know. I believe her. And I think there is a smear character assassination element, but...
Well, there's always politics, and then we just don't know. And by the time this podcast airs, we don't know what's going to happen, but there'll probably be a vote or decision. So those of you listening to this, we don't know, but we're just glad to have Christina back. Christina, this marks the first podcast that we are with the E1 network, which is huge. It's a big deal, kind of a big deal.
They sponsor Rihanna.
They do. They have...
No, I was kidding. Do they really?
Well, they
could.
No, they produce television shows like The Walking Dead, Sharp Objects. They're kind of a huge international network that has been doing TV content, video content, music content. You walk into their E1 offices, which I've done. They've got little Grammy records all over. And now they've just started to get into podcasts. And they have signed us up.
So we've been signed up.
So we've been signed. So anyway, we're just thrilled to be a part of E1. I think some of you, I noticed on Twitter, expressed frustration when our last podcast went live. And I think there were some migratory RSS feed issues. But I'm hoping by the time you hear this, they will have all been worked out.
Whatever the hell that is. But never mind.
RSS.
Thank you for
thrilled to be part of E1. And Christina, I just wanted to tell you, I just discovered it's Sober October, which is really bad news for the podcast.
Wait a minute. Tell me about this.
Well, okay. Before I even knew it was Sober October, yesterday I said...
Is that a thing?
Apparently it's a thing. It's a hashtag. It's like Movember, where men grow mustaches for breast cancer or something like that. Right. But anyway, last night on my own volition, I decided, you know what? I have to have a Sober October. And I didn't drink any wine last night. And I'm planning not to drink wine.
I saw you with some vodka earlier.
Okay,
today.
That's different in the podcast. For the podcast, we have to have something.
We have to have something.
It would be a disaster if you had nothing. I brought in
studies and the research shows, and it'd be a nervous wreck.
Right. I brought you in champagne because I wasn't enforcing Sober October on you.
Can we start in November?
November.
No, let's do it after the holidays.
After the holidays. January. Sober January.
Well, you know what? That'll be my goal. I'm just going to have fun, and then January, except for the podcast.
Well, giving up wine is a huge deal.
It's not worth it.
I keep telling myself that, and then I go and try on clothes. Yeah. And then I say,
but
why
if you
is
have
this
the cute clothes and you go out and can't drink, why go out?
That's a good point. You're making a compelling point. Anyway, so yes, I did pour a tiny bit of vodka for this podcast, but vodka doesn't count in Sober October, right?
Does vodka have calories?
No, none, apparently. It's mineral water or something. Coke Zero, it's nothing.
Zoe, do you agree with that?
Zoe.
Just a fact check.
In the
Can
studio.
You Google it? Does vodka have?
No, it does, but it has fewer calories.
I feel like it's something that's in the difference between whether it's if it's potato based or
right. and apparently if you're on a protein Atkins diet, you can have bourbon or whiskey.
I'm going to Google it.
Okay.
Back to you.
Just find the lowest calorie drink. I think it's champagne.
But that still won't count for
alcohol.
Sober October. Okay. Anyway, the biggest controversy after the Supreme Court hearings, which you were conveniently not here for, and I had to have Emily Yaffe and Nat and our friends on for, You had the jazz hands controversy.
Yes, I've had a controversy
Tell
on
us
Twitter.
what is
And
the
just
jazz
as an
hands?
example of the hate tweets I'm getting, someone says, in response to a tweet of mine about jazz hands, someone said, and I'll explain them in a minute. Someone said, Christina Hoff-Sommer should get mental help. She is infected by the radical left-wing and intolerant identity politics. So
Jazz hands have been taken over?
Well, I endorsed jazz hands. Now, this all came...
How do you be against jazz hands? I just don't get this.
Well, let me explain.
Okay.
Some highly sensitive people have determined that clapping is triggering. That just, clapping. You shouldn't do that. And you should show affection by putting your hands up. Apparently, it's in British Sign Language for the deaf. This means applause.
But you can't hear it.
But you can see it. If you are a speaker and I tell audiences when I go, kind of as a little joke, that I do not want any clapping in this event. I request jazz hands or finger clicking.
What if you can't click your fingers? Isn't that that's very woke, right?
I can't snap.
Can't snap.
So then what if you're snap handicapped?
I know.
Yeah, snap challenged.
I should tell you in another turn of controversy, 80 proof vodka has 64 calories.
Oh, that's dietary.
80 proof.
1 ounce, 64 calories? Yep. All right, Christina. Doesn't have to be that sober in October.
Is there a way to make it fizzy and pink? Jazz hands.
So it's become clapping. Clapping is triggering.
I go to universities and there are people in the audience in the Q&A. Someone says critical things about me. They will click their fingers or they'll do jazz hands. And I can't believe it because it seems so crazy. However, just as a little joke, I said on Twitter that at my lectures, I request jazz hands or finger snaps in place of applause because clapping can make all of us feel unsafe. It was just a joke, but people on Twitter are taking it seriously and thinking that I'm now an out of control, over the top sensitivity fanatic.
I'm sorry. I'm just sitting here listening to you, my mouth open, because I'm trying to imagine talking to an audience where everyone's doing jazz hands, and I'm thinking, wait, I'm not singing. What am I supposed to be doing? This is so weird.
It's so weird and off-putting. Well, it came from Occupy Wall Street. Remember they did...
I don't remember jazz hands.
They had jazz hands. They had all these hand signals because they didn't want Robert's Rules of Order. Those are fascist. So they've replaced them with, radical
I guess in the
process, and it's more democratic. They've decentered leadership. I don't know what the hell they're doing. But anyway, so it's trickled down or around to the woke classroom or the woke campus where I go. But now I require it. I say you cannot clap. If you like what I say, I want jazz hands. If you don't like what I say, just be very quiet.
Wait a second. What if you want to boo? Isn't booing more triggering?
You know what they do? They hiss.
Clapping?
Hissing
is really bad.
I was hissed.
That's worse than
at
booing.
Wellesley College. And I told them that they should not do that because it's marginalizing to people with lisps. They actually stopped. I said something. They thought, maybe we're being insensitive. Lisping is a microaggression.
What if you're like a cat and you just go...
I wish they would.
But I don't know. Maybe you're not allowed to show displeasure at all.
For the record, Squash doesn't hiss. So
what?
I said Squash doesn't hiss.
He's
a
cat.
Good boy.
Yeah, but he's like a dog. Your cat's a dog, Zoe.
Anyway, let's move on.
Okay, moving on.
And let's have some jazz hands.
Let's have some jazz.
And some jazz for our wonderful guest today. I loved her book.
This is Beck Dorey-Stein, and she wrote From the Corner of the Oval. She was a stenographer, a millennial, she was a very young stenographer, for the Obama administration. She got her job off of Craigslist, which she'll tell us about. It's an amazing story of someone who really wasn't interested in politics at all, and then found herself as this fly on the wall in making history.
And going on Air Force One, and everywhere the president went, she would go. Just recording it and then typing. I thought the person that hired her on Craigslist showed great ingenuity, doing their job well, because she was an honors student, English student at Northwestern. Then she taught at Sidwell Friends part-time. She was teaching English. Then she goes there and has to take a test. She thinks it's going to be typing. It's basically an intelligence test she has to do. And they see she's very smart. So they get this brilliant girl to be the stenographer. And when you hear what the job requires, you can understand why you need to be brilliant. You need to be very adaptable. You need to be...
Oh, and she pointed at discreet. What I liked about it was a real reveal of what it's like to work in the White House, as opposed to trying to explain the Obama administration. If you remember, Christina, my husband David worked for George W.
Yes.
Pre 9/11.
And on 9/11.
And on 9/11. And one of the things, years later, he'll go out, he'll give speeches. The first thing that people always ask him was, what was it like to work in the White House?
Right.
Like, people really want to know. And they don't want to know, well, I made, many important policy decisions. Like, that's not what they want to know. They want to know, what was it like? And Beck really captured this. I remember at the time when David was there, our kids, I was pregnant with our third child, B. Miranda would have been 9, and Nathaniel would have been 7. And before 9/11, there was security, but the security was way less than it would suddenly become after 9/11, obviously. You had to work all the time, and he would go into the office on Sundays or on the weekends, and he worked in the old executive office building, which looks like that wedding cake building, 19th century wedding cake next to the White House.
A beautiful building.
Oh, and a crazy history. And the kids, though, would go with him. And then they would just go feral. It was like Eloise, in the Plaza Hotel. They'd have their little passes around their neck. He would sit in his office, and they would bolt over. They'd go to the West Wing. They'd go to the mess and steal M&Ms.
They could go bowling, maybe?
They didn't go bowling, but they would bump into, I remember, Secret Service guards walking Barney the dog, if you remember Barney.
Barney.
They'd walk Barney, then they would throw the tennis ball, and then on from there. I mean, if the president was there, which W usually wasn't on the weekends, he'd lay like Camp David or whatever. He'd be off like mountain biking on Camp David. So our children have this magical memory of being in the White House.
You went there for Hanukkah.
Yes, they were there. I think that was maybe one of the first candle lightings. There were so few Jewish members of the administration at that point. This is not a statement on George W.'s administration, but they sort of said that they put out an all points memo. We're going to do our first Hanukkah candle lighting. Could you bring in your children? And so, our kids came in, or at that time 2 kids, and, a few other kids dragged in.
Down and they got
stenographers. And then there was one family that had 5 kids.
Oh, I know who that was.
And then suddenly they all arrived, and it filled the frame. And yes, there's a picture of Miranda, our eldest daughter, with Laura Bush lighting the candle. So, I mean, these are things that are so incredible, and that you will never forget. And that's what I think I loved about this book, was it really put you inside on the day-to-day operations of the White House. And then it was also this kind of coming of age for this young woman.
Someone said it's sort of C-SPAN meets Sex in the City.
That's exactly it.
And
that's exactly
it. And it was just readable and funny, and I just couldn't help but love her. She's such a character and so warm, and she comes into this high-powered, no-nonsense environment, but she has kind of a quirky California personality.
Right, like she's not trying to be the most important person in the room, which is...
No, she's trying to be friendly.
Right.
And, she thought of bringing, it was Valentine's Day, I think, her first day, and she wanted to bring everybody cookies, and her boyfriend said, maybe get to know them first. She was going to be, he said that's a little teachery, she'd been a teacher.
Right. And so not Washington.
And so can you imagine? She just has a good eye, and she kept very good notes day by day, and she had this wonderful adventure.
Well, and she also captures very well, too, the self-importance of Washington and the badge hierarchy of Washington. That
the careerism, the frenetic, sort of competition in the bars, and people coming up, what do you do? And then looking over your shoulders when it's insufficiently important to their career.
Right. The looking over the shoulder at the party syndrome is so brutally true of Washington. And it never goes away. As somebody once described Washington as an oligarchy. I guess, there are other industry towns that do this, LA, New York, but your importance in DC is your closeness to the king.
Right.
And there are just circles after that. So the people who are in his immediate circle are like lords and barons.
Right.
Literally baron in this case. And then, the next circle is maybe the press, and they could be gentlemen or esquires, and then it sort of goes beyond that. And that changes every 4 years or every 8 years. So it's always very unsettling socially to be here because you never know where you are. And it changes. And one person in one day is out the next, as we've seen very brutally.
I once had access.
Well, that's right. My children once had access. Well, it's a weird and interesting and magical place. So look forward to bringing Beck on.
Bring her on.
Bring her on.
Welcome, Beck Dorey-Stein, to the Femsplainers.
Thank you for having me.
Do you have a Cape Codder set up next to you? Because part of our show is, of course, or essential to our show is cocktails. And that was what you drank all through the book, if I recall.
That is. My other favorite cocktail is actually iced coffee. So I have one of those.
Hey, wait, iced coffee is not a cocktail.
I mean, it has a really great effect for me.
I wish that worked for me. That would solve so many problems. Well, welcome.
We're just very excited to hear the story of what it was like to have a front row seat on history and where you were just there by getting your job from Craigslist. You got a job at the White House going on Air Force One from Craigslist. How does that work?
So I'm sad to say I am the first and last Craigslist-er, but it's true. In 2012, I was working 5 part-time jobs in Washington, D.C. I had moved there for a teaching job, and then that wasn't making rent on its own. So then I was also tutoring and working at a coffee shop and working 20 hours a week at Lululemon. And all of the hustle and bustle led me to believe maybe I would do better with one full-time job. And I thought maybe I'd be a lawyer with my English major background. So I applied to be a stenographer at a law firm through Craigslist just to kind of get my feet wet and see if I actually wanted to be in a law firm. And I would eventually work my way up to be a paralegal, and who knew what would happen from there. And I went and took a test that was similar to a verbal GRE and decided, nope, I was having more fun teaching.
And teaching at Sidwell, you have to mention. You were part-time at Sidwell Friends, the Tony Washington private school where the Obama kids were at the time, right? The daughters?
That's right. Yeah. So I was the upper school writing tutor. I had replaced a woman who was on maternity leave, and so then she came back in the fall. So then it was very part-time. I was just working on Wednesdays. So then I got a call back for this Craigslist law firm job. I ended up blowing off the interview because my shift at Lululemon ran late, and that seemed much more promising at the time. And it was only after I had blown off the interview and written to this woman through Craigslist apologizing and withdrawing my application. She wrote back and she said, this is actually a job at the White House, and you'd be traveling with the president on all of his domestic and international trips, which was just, mind-blowing and ridiculous. And it actually took my roommate at the time to sit me down and be like, this is Washington, D.C. Crazier things have happened. You should write back. Because I was convinced it was
right. It would seem like you think it was a prank.
Yeah. For sure, crazier things have happened, certainly since. But that is an amazing story.
I like to joke that now it's like in the Obama White House, I was underqualified to be a stenographer. But in the Trump White House, I could really be a cabinet member. I have more background than most people.
Well, tell us exactly what a stenographer in the White House does. It's such a sort of archaic job title.
Yeah, I had no idea they existed after 1950, but...
they wear buns?
Yeah, you should have been wearing glasses.
Cat eye glasses. And Southern.
Yeah. So we think of courtroom stenographers who can type in real time and have little machines and no shorthand, and I don't know any of those things. I've been a high school English teacher before, but a White House stenographer is hired much more on the basis of discretion, and because I had taught at Sidwell Friends, I had already gone through an FBI background check.
Were you a good typist?
On that front. I was a fine typist, but I wasn't especially skilled. But White House stenographers, just so we all are on the same page, we record and then we type afterwards because it's much more about accuracy and making sure the transcript is 100% accurate and correct. And we always have 2 sets of ears and 2 sets of eyes on every transcript that we let out, or at least we did when I was there.
To my ear, you just had it so easy because I'm so old that when I actually was in high school and I thinking of going into journalism, my mother, who was also a journalist, taught me Pittman's shorthand. It looks like Chinese or something. Like I will still do grocery lists in Pittman's shorthand. So you would just basically take TV or radio or live recording and then go back to your office and type it up.
it was even better than that. It meant that when President Obama had an interview in the Oval Office, I would get to go in with the interviewer and put down my recorders next to his seat and listen for the duration of the interview. I would just be across the room listening to this interview, which consisted of just the president, and Pete Souza would come through and take a few photographs and then leave, and the interviewer, and sometimes the press secretary was there. But I really got to be in these incredible moments where it was just two great thinkers picking each other's brains. And so then afterwards we would type it up. So it was not, it had a lot of perks without requiring that much skill. And I certainly did not know shorthand.
Well, what is sort of amazing about your book and the angle of it, Christina and I were talking about before you came on, that so many White House memoirs or books about the presidents, I mean, they're these sort of history-making or attempt to be history-making or Bob Woodwardy or something, but I felt like you had really were looking at it as Nick Carraway looked at Gatsby, that to have that fly on the wall observer narrator status in this incredible situation was so fascinating. And you also made us really feel what it was like. I mean, your stories of Air Force One, just tell us about some of those scenes of what you experienced and that I guess all your friends would want to know what was it like. Air Force One, being in the White House mess, sitting in the Oval Office.
Being on a treadmill, and then next to you is
the president.
Yeah, so I think a big part of why I wanted to write the book was exactly because I wanted to share that experience. Again, I got the job on Craigslist. I felt really lucky. I had never planned on working in the White House or in politics in general. And so I thought about my former students when I had been teaching, and also all of my friends. What if they had been the one to luck out with this Craigslist job? And because I don't have a background in policy, and I wasn't especially smitten with the idea of seeming more important than I was because I was a stenographer, I wanted to just kind of capture the behind the scenes of working in the White House as a normal person, because as an outsider, I had no idea just how many people were there every day and all of these jobs that I had never heard of that were so important. And then, of course, getting to see the president up close, one of the more popular questions is, well, what's he really like? And the nice thing about President Obama is that he's exactly how he appears, except I think he's a little funnier in person because he just makes more jokes when the cameras aren't rolling. So the first time that he actually spoke to me was on a treadmill in a hotel gym in Colorado. It was my first year. We were on the campaign during his reelection, and I was running, and this guy comes on next to me, and I assumed it was a Secret Service agent. And I look, and this guy says, "I thought you'd be faster than that." And I was just like, what? And
Whoa.
I turn, and it's not a Secret Service agent. It's the president, who I've never spoken to before.
Oh,
and now
my.
I'm just like dripping wet. And it's 7 a.m. I definitely have not had any coffee yet. And he has this twinkle in his eye because he just knows he's gotten me. And he's very mischievous in that way. He loves to catch people on their heels. And I think that began kind of our bond as gym rats in hotel gyms across the country and actually around the world. That was our little bond.
Hey,
Even
how
when he met
fast
my
were you
parents.
running, and how faster was he than you?
how many miles?
Or
An hour.
speed?
He wasn't faster than I was. Oh, no. I was going pretty fast. And that's funny because he would always be like, what are you doing, like an 8.5? And I was like, I don't know what that means. I just know my splits. So that was sort of our running joke, so that he actually did come up
Literally
to
a
me
running
at
joke.
Yes, at Hawaiian luau, and was just like, so how fast are your splits? And it was this very cute moment because then I told him, and then he just walked away to go tell his Secret Service agent because apparently they had been betting. And he was like, that's what I thought. That's what I thought it was. But a big part of why I wanted to write the book was also these characters that I got to see up close, and not, I think a lot of times in that genre of White House memoirs, it's these older guys who like to tell you that they were the last person in the room before the big decision was made. And I was the opposite of that. I was the first person out of the room. I was often just coming in and out with the press, but I was recording on the record and off the record background briefings, and I was traveling everywhere. And so I was just so enamored of how dedicated these people were, especially because I had entered Washington, D.C. pretty cynical about government. And then to see these people up close every day, missing birthday parties, missing anniversaries, working for the greater good, I wanted to sort of capture that and profile that. And in addition to those people, it was also like we were traveling on Air Force One, which is insane. and going to countries all over the world. And I hadn't been much of a traveler before. So to go to Burma twice and to go to China 4 times.
Well, is it like going on Delta? Like, is it really awful and miserable, or what happens?
No,
Tell
it's
us about
not.
Air Force One.
No.
You lose your bag.
It basically becomes your home away from home, especially when you're doing a 10-day Asia swing. My seat, you have an assigned seat if you're a regular traveler. So right there, that feels really good to be like, I don't have to stress about where my seat is. I'm not looking up to see which row and what seat. I know that my
Or fighting someone
staff
for it.
cabin, yeah, and I can leave my stuff there. So when we would hit 3 different countries in Southeast Asia, I would just leave one of my bags on the plane the whole time. So it's not like Delta.
But physically, what is it like?
Can you lie down at night? Can
Yeah.
you lay down?
The chairs don't go down all the way, at least not in the staff cabin. The president has a bedroom in the front and a private bathroom with a shower.
Did you ever see it? They take
Oh,
you
yeah,
to tours?
you can get a tour of it. Yeah. And then there's the senior staff cabin, and there are fewer seats in there, and also the conference room. So people will compete for floor space. So if you're senior staff, you get a space on the floor, and then people would bring yoga mats or sleeping mats.
Literal floor space, like not square foot.
Yeah. But I was definitely not senior enough. So I was always just sort of trying to nestle into my chair.
Are these, so we can visualize it, is it like a private jet, or is it like a regular, large airplane, but with the front and other places designed for the president and his staff, and then the back and the press just in fairly regular seats?
Yeah, so it's 747, which is a big commercial plane, but I think on a commercial flight, it's over 300 seats, and on Air Force One, it's less than 100, I believe. So there's way fewer seats because the president has, again, a bedroom and a bathroom and a conference room and an office. And then there's a staff cabin and a senior staff cabin and press cabin, Secret Service cabin, and there are 2 kitchens. So the layout could not be more different. There's a guest cabin.
Is the food good?
The food is amazing. And
A lot of drinking?
On the flights back after like a 10-day trip, we would have like celebratory drinks, but most of the time you're just going somewhere. I mean, that's why I'm serious about my second favorite cocktail in the world is coffee, because it's just what kind of got me through
it's fuel. It's
all the
fuel.
jet lag. My favorite thing about Air Force One is actually it's all run by active duty military. So because of that, the flight attendants become like a second parent to you. And they know your preferences, and I don't eat red meat, so I never even had to say that after my second trip. Chrissy just knew, okay, Beck will want the vegetarian option. But the food is great, and the people who keep that plane running are just like the most selfless, most professional, kind-hearted people I've ever met, where they're barely sleeping, they barely get crew rest, and yet they're always happy to help. And they do run a tight ship, but in the best way possible.
One of the things that struck me in your book is how physically arduous your job was. And getting up early and traveling endless night and day, packing, unpacking, and then sitting in vans and, in the heat for 4 hours and hurry up and wait. And that would take a lot out of me. I would feel like I just don't know how you did it. What was that like?
Well, I think of it now because I just did this European book tour. And so it was funny to be hitting some of the same cities where last time I'd been there was with the president, but it was just me by myself on commercial flights. And I was like, oh man, this is exhausting. How did I do this for 5 years?
How old were you again, Beck, at the time?
Mid-20s, so 25 and then to 30. I was there from when I was 25.
Right. So Christina, she also had the energy. I mean,
yeah.
I love what you say about the dedication of the staff, and that's a real military culture, I guess. But you talked about some of the people you met. You talked about President Obama. You get I think what I also loved about your book is it's all very real. Like the President Obama you describe and that humor and the treadmill seems very, very true to what we saw in public. Did you ever meet Michelle Obama?
Yes. So there are 5 White House stenographers, and there were 3 for the president, 1 for the vice president, and 1 for the first lady. So my colleague was the official FLOTUS first lady stenographer. So I only traveled with the first lady a handful of times when my colleague was sick. And it was very fun because, she's the same way. She's exactly how she comes across, except maybe a little funnier in real life. But I did get to travel on her plane, which I believe was John Kerry's Secretary of State plane. And so it's a little smaller with a smaller crew. But I just remember walking on board, as being the new kid all over again, because it's a totally different team. It's the East Wing team. And I get on board and I'm just like, okay, keep your head down, like try to just blend in as much as possible. I'm not the regular stenographer. I want to stay out of everyone's way. And I get to the top of the air stairs and the flight attendant is like, welcome aboard. Can I interest you in a caramel frappuccino? And I was like, what? I was like, well, how did I not get to be the FLOTUS stenographer?
This is a fun plane. This is the party plane.
Yeah, because unlike President Obama, the First Lady kind of, gets to pick and choose her initiatives and what she wants to focus on. And so that day we went to a high school to talk about graduation and working hard in school. And again, as a former English teacher, I was so impressed with the way that she just immediately connected to these teenagers and had them laughing, but also you could see the wheels turning in their head where they're like, oh yeah, she worked really hard. She didn't come from much. Why am I not working as hard? I should work harder. And she did it all with this like humor and grace that I think we know is classic Michelle Obama at this point.
Yeah, she's so impressive. I just loved seeing what she would wear when she'd come off the plane. It was always some beautiful dress.
Well, as you're talking, Beck, I'm trying to imagine what the Melania FLOTUS plane and you walk up and it's like, would you like some mineral water?
Yeah.
One of many things I liked about the book is it's also just a great book to give a young woman who's sort of finding her way in the world. Yeah. And you were this ingenue, you're just coming into this world, complicated world there was a lot of competition and people weren't always nice. And you had a lot of women in your circle of colleagues. Overall, supportive or undermining, or can you generalize?
I like to say that the book is from my perspective, but it's really kind of an ode to these women I got to work with who very much were my mentors. They kind of ran the gamut as far as their rank and how senior staff they were, but they were all extremely kind to me and mentored me, and I would not have survived without them, and I certainly wouldn't have been able to write this book. They were the main source of encouragement as I was figuring out, wait, I really like to write and I should be paying attention to that. And so a big part of when I was writing the book was thinking about who is my audience, who am I trying to connect to, and I was thinking about young women entering their first job or second job or third job, figuring out being in your 20s and navigating not only the roadblocks and obstacles of professional careers, but also personal lives and how sometimes that can blend together in really problematic ways, but also figuring out, I think, the messages that you have to pay attention to kind of what sets your heart on fire. Because I was a stenographer in the White House, which stenographer was not especially glamorous, but getting to say I worked in the White House, people would kind of be like, whoa, tell me everything you know. And yet when I was happiest and most proud of myself was when I was writing. And so I think when you're in your 20s, it's so rare you get to get paid for what you want to do, but that doesn't mean you can't carve out time to do what you want to do. Really important that you do that work.
To be fair, that wasn't the real thing that set your heart on fire most. But before we get to that bad boy, I wanted to ask you, you said that women were very supportive, but what I was also fascinated with, and I think a lot of us have experienced this in our careers and in the work world. I mean, you've written this sort of coming of age professionally book. There was one character, and we won't ask you to name who it was, called the Rattler.
Who was the Rattler? Tell us.
I think everyone's had a Rattler.
Yeah, they have had a Rattler. And then there was the Vagiants. Was that a certain generation of women or older women? Like, I got that sense that there were also some women, and maybe it was also a Washington Power thing where they're closer to the president, that sort of didn't want to help a young upstart. What was that sort of female power dynamic?
Well, it's a power dynamic that unfortunately I think is pretty familiar to any young woman. At least I've had a Rattler in every job I've ever had, which I think is why I wanted to write about it, was just this is still a problem. And
describe the Rattler for us. Describe her. The
Rattler is someone who's a senior staffer in the White House who publicly is constantly calling herself a champion of young women, and yet as someone who worked under her and was constantly in direct proximity, she went out of her way to make sure I did not feel a part of the team. And, little things like she only had a male assistant, which I was just like, that's such an easy way to sort of cultivate the next generation. Take someone under your wing, and yet she had a male assistant. She would take young male staffers out to dinner, and it just seemed like the ultimate hypocrisy. Drove me crazy, considering there were so many other women that were great. And so part of it was also figuring out, okay, there's a Rattler here, but if I focus my attention more to all of the potential mentors, there are so many more of those women. So I just need to sort of go toward the good and go toward all these women who are willing to help me.
Yeah. Do you think that's a female thing? Like, do you think it's an older woman being threatened by a younger woman? Or, I mean, I guess men do this too in their own way, but there does seem, if we were to be frank about it, I remember when I was a younger woman, and there was that always sort of, and we're talking older women like 40 versus 20, the 28-year-old, where they feel like I had to work, I had to do this, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not going to make it easy for you. And that always seemed counterintuitive to sisterhood. But is that fair?
Yeah, and I think there's like this sort of, and I talk about it in the book, where someone suggests, oh, she feels threatened by you. And it's like, what? Like, I have none of her influence. I've got nothing on her. Mm-hmm. But I think as you get older, depending on how you're feeling about yourself, I think it has very little to do with the young person. And that's what I was trying to get across, was that it had nothing to do with me. You can't make someone appreciate what they have if they're feeling insecure or like their own life is out of control. But I liked that the longer I was in the White House, the more I did focus on all of these other women.
Those other women, okay, and they were so positive and outnumbered this one.
Yeah, and they were of all different ages too.
Please join the Femsplainers.
Yes, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or your favorite podcast hangout.
And follow us on Instagram at the Femsplainer Podcast.
And find the Femsplainers on Facebook and Twitter at Femsplainers.
And learn all about us at femsplainers.com. Thank you.
Yeah, Femsplainer.
We're talking to Beck Dorey-Stein about her book, From the Corner of the Oval. I do have to ask a question. I don't know if it was a mentor or a wise person. Almost the day you started, gave you advice. She said, do you have a boyfriend? You said yes. And they said, keep your boyfriend. And basically advising you, do not have love affairs, especially on the road.
And this was pre-Me Too. And you're in your 20s.
And you did. You met a bad boy. And you kept going back to him.
Can you please explain? Christina, I read this as your mother, and we're just like, obviously, this guy, why? I get his attraction, but...
I totally get why she did it, but it's still...
It's bad for you, Beck. It's bad for you. Tell about, you're in this heady environment, and you're working together intensely, and I guess these things are inevitable, but he wasn't a nice guy in the end, so tell us about that.
Well, he was a nice guy. I think that's what's so difficult, is that if you ask anyone in the world about it, and they'd be like, oh, he's the nicest guy. And so
he was charming, but he was not nice.
But he was honest, wasn't he? Mostly, didn't he say?
Well, he was honest about his expectations, I got the impression of. But people say they're nice, but they don't. Nice is too generic.
Nice, but I don't.
Very charming and seeming to care about you, but then he was always causing you to burst into tears, and he was going off with other women, and he was cheating on his fiancée. He can't be nice.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that fiancé in California. Oh, God.
But what was the attraction? Was it just like the military? Is it like being you're just in a situation so exotic and so intense that the usual rules
I don't know.
apply?
I think it was the perfect storm. I was in this relationship with my long-distance relationship with my boyfriend who was never around, and here was this charming guy who, there's like 15 Obama staffers who go everywhere with him. And so we become this tight-knit group. And then I think there's something alluring about this person actually understands what I'm going through. Because if you try to tell a friend who's not traveling with you, hey, like Air Force One is great, but I'm exhausted and I'm really beat up and I'm stressed out and I just need a day off. They're like, hey, you should feel really lucky. You get to work in the White House. You get to travel on Air Force One. And so here's someone who understands, hey, on day 7 of an international trip, you're exhausted and also you haven't had a proper meal in a week. And they get it. And so I think there's that component.
Or a proper something.
And you're going to exotic locales and you have this amazing view and you have a hotel room. And it really is sort of like going to Disney World. And it's a separate life from the one that you have in Washington, D.C. And also I do think that, I really did love that guy and I did feel a connection to him. But I think there was a lot of components. I think if I wasn't traveling, I would have stopped much earlier. The problem is that I kept finding myself in Southeast Asia with this guy when I was jet lagged and we had been drinking. So it was just a perfect combination of trouble.
I did not go to college. I went right into a newsroom. So right from 18 through my early 20s. And I remember working in a city newsroom was so intense. And of course, when you're in your 20s, you're a young woman, you're just all into the job. That's all you do. And you get home late, you go to sleep, you wake up, you just live and breathe your job. And I remember at the time, there would be these sort of older guys on the city desk, the older editors, And like they had these exotic things called families and children. And I'd be at that time, again, not to mark my age, but I would be answering the city desk phone or something, which people did back then. And it would be, ex-editor's wife calling so he could say goodnight to the kids. And it was like getting a call from Mars. And the editor himself looked vaguely embarrassed, and he'd kind of look around and say, good night, honey. But the sort of that whole wife family culture was so removed from the intensity of the newsroom and that world. And I suspect the White House is that on steroids, that you guys are in such a unique situation.
Exactly. And there's that sense of this all ends at some point.
Right.
We have an end date to this.
Right. So
I described it sometimes as it being like senior year of college, where you're just trying to like gobble up the experience as much as you possibly can and do as much as you can in a limited period of time. And that also means you're holding tightly to something that is eventually going to fall through your fingers.
Right. And it's such a magical thing that you have.
And it actually sounded exciting. I'm talking about the affair. I mean, being in all these places,
All of it.
and this guy coming to your room late at night. So, and then I was thinking, now in the Me Too era, he wasn't your boss, but he would be considered someone with more power than you, right?
He had more, I guess. I don't know.
He was
Not
pretty
really.
prominent, as you described him.
Swimming in different lanes, I would say.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm just wondering if these things will survive the Me Too era. My guess is yes.
You mean intense office romances, which is also what these editors were doing, by the way.
Consensual.
Well, I think the big thing there is that it was completely consensual. So it's not like I was being forced into anything or threatened in any way.
Right. But what we're also seeing now is if you wanted to make it a problem, if you were of that,
You could ruin his life.
you could possibly
get
ruin
revenge.
your life. Remember his birthday present to you, Beck? I'm sorry, I'm putting on my mother hat again, getting me very worried about your attraction. Remember what he
Are
gave
you still seeing him back?
No. Beck, remember what he gave you as a birthday present. And if a colleague did that, think about it today, post Me Too, that could have ruined.
I forget what it was.
I don't want to say it. Beck will have to say it. I'm too prudish.
A vibrator? No.
Yeah, right? Are you there, Beck?
Yeah. Yeah.
What did you had asked him for a rare book, a beautiful rare book. And he gave you...
he's sort of notorious for giving these really sweet, specific first edition books to friends. So I wanted one of those, but I got a vibrator on my 30th birthday instead.
In front of your colleagues.
Well, friends. Yeah.
A Hello Kitty one? They have them.
Really? Really, Christina? How do you know?
Did
you get the Hello Kitty vibrator catalog? Do they have Minnie Mouse? Minnie Mouse? You know what? We're going to talk about your book because if we delve into maternal worry about you, that I was so upset.
Well, you don't have
happened.
to be worried. I mean, remember, I wrote this book and it's come out. And so we're talking about 2 years ago is when all of this stuff ended.
Yeah, that's not so long.
So.
And I don't worry about her at all. She's fantastic.
don't
and she
worry
had
about
a
her, but-
bad adventure and she got through it and has
I know,
a great
this
story
guy
to
was
tell.
such an obvious.
And now I want to know, I think this book obviously will be a movie. Who do you think should play you? I'm thinking maybe Jennifer Lawrence.
Oh,
I
good,
love
good,
so
good
much.
cast.
How about
That's
that?
so nice of you to say that. Yeah, I think it'd also be fun just to get someone on Craigslist. It's like full circle.
Jennifer Lawrence is a great idea. Okay, fast forward before you tell us about what you're doing now.
I'm really lucky I get to write a second book. So
Oh,
I'm working on that.
are you in Philly?
Yeah, I'm in Philly. I'm sort of bouncing around because I'm still promoting the book. So I'm doing a library talk later today. Yeah, bouncing around Philly. And then I'm also doing a bit of a friendship tour because I didn't see any of my friends for 5 years.
Oh,
So
nice.
I'm kind of going around the country and trying to catch up with people whose weddings and baby showers I missed while I was working at the White House.
Tell us, though, you wrote a little bit about the transition and the change of culture that came in when you guys were leaving.
Yeah, so it just could not have been more different. I mean, first of all, it really was like, I don't know, having to repeat senior year almost, where all of my friends were suddenly gone from the complex. And walking into the gate, which I had always been so proud to do, I suddenly felt very self-conscious. There are all these protests going on. And I walked through the gate, and instead of it being like Fords and Chevys, the senior staff parking lot is suddenly full of Maseratis and Jaguars, and it's just a totally different group of people. And walking into the West Wing for the first time, it just sort of felt like this chaotic change had taken place where offices that had been occupied by my friends who had really important jobs, not even in the sense of being powerful, but in the sense of, okay, like who is compiling the daily briefing book right now? Those offices were empty. And so it's just like, who's doing all of these jobs that just kind of keeps the place running? And as we know, the Trump administration had gone out of its way to not coordinate with the Obama administration during the transition. They just didn't want anything to do with the Obamas. And so because of that, I think they sort of set themselves back quite a bit as far as just learning day-to-day operations of the White House. It was a horrible feeling. I remember the first time I went in was for the senior staff swearing in the East Room. And I walked into the East Room and I found the pool, the press pool, so the 13 reporters, and they all just hugged me. And it was almost like going to a funeral and seeing the receiving line where they were all like, it's so nice to see you. It's so nice to see you. They don't get it because they were having a really hard time getting just access to basic things that they knew they had access to. I was there for 2 months. And so the whole time I was there, I'm sure it settled down a bit. But when I was there, it was a daily fight over what does press have access to, and also as a stenographer, what are we privy to? Because they didn't want us in the room when he was having interviews with the press, which is crazy and it makes him vulnerable. And so I wrote the New York Times op-ed about President Trump is intentionally not including stenographers because then there's a record of what's said, and that would contradict what he wants to do. He doesn't want the truth out there, and that's what the record is. It's a transcription of exactly what was said.
Yeah, a record can be inconvenient.
I knew actually someone who had worked for Bush and who was part of the transition team. Like, there is a playbook for transition. They had it. It was presented to the Trump people, and it was extensive with, briefings, and this is how you do this, and these are the jobs very 101 stuff. And they rejected it outright, that they wanted to do it their own way. And that's what you kind of reflected.
They just didn't trust anyone who had been there, even if it was just career people who wanted the White House to run, regardless of which party was coming in.
Could you have stayed, or did you want to stay, or you were just done with it by then?
No, I mean, again, I'd been wanting to write forever, and then I'd been writing the whole time I was there. When Trump won on Election Day, it was sort of a wake-up call for me that was like, okay, well, if Donald Trump can win, I can probably write better than I think I can, and now is the time to take myself more seriously. And so that's when I started to pursue writing. And then when he gave his inauguration speech, I was dismayed by the language he used. It felt divisive, and it felt like a call to arms, and it seemed like he was othering a big part of the people who comprise this country. And so I knew I wouldn't last long.
Oh, I can imagine.
I was there for 2
that
months.
was a very aggressive speech, and I can imagine.
Yeah, it was very othering. That's a good
Other,
way
and then
of
sort
putting
of
it.
typing it up and going, oh my God, okay.
So yeah, I mean, as a stenographer, I not only listened to it, but I had to listen to it multiple times and then proofread it. And it was
Oh,
like,
that's
this
so
is
funny
not
because I had
what
to
I
listen
agree
to it
with.
once. So, final question. Do you miss the Washington bar scene?
And the Washington culture. That whole wonderful culture.
No, although it's much easier to enter that and just sort of like smile to myself having written about it. And also, I wrote about that scene. The opening scene of the book is about going into a bar in D.C. and people saying, what do you do? And it's when I didn't have a job, and it just made me feel about 3 inches tall.
No, it's like, what do you do? What do you do?
Yeah.
And now
I
you
can't
can
tell
say,
you how many
I'm
people have
a
written to me
best-selling
to
author.
be like, oh my gosh, you get it. Because I think so many people, even if they love politics, even if they love Washington, there is that moment when someone asks, what do you do? And you know that you're getting measured in a way that you're like, no, but I'm so much more than what I do every day. And so I wanted to kind of catch that on paper. But no, now it's kind of I go and I laugh to myself because I know better now.
Well, you talked about the first boyfriend at the time, whom I liked, by the way, as your mother. I really liked
Is Sam still around?
He made you watch The West Wing. And actually, sometimes we get asked, like, what is the TV show that most captures Washington? It is never The West Wing. It is always Veep. That whole culture of pass, prestige, like which pass you have hanging around your neck, what access you have.
And crisis managing. It's just, they go from crisis to crisis and everybody.
Well, but it's also been like the title is
And the hierarchy and pecking order.
important. I mean, my husband David used to say like he was special assistant to the president, and that sounded like really special. And he had a joke, which he realizes now probably not politically correct, but he says, when people say, what does special assistant mean? And he goes, well, special assistant is to assistant to the president what Special Olympics
or
is to
special education.
It was one remove. Like if you really wanted to be important, you were assistant to the president. But it's this crazy hierarchy, right? And it's constant. It doesn't stop when you get older. I can tell you that. But you're happy to be out of it?
Yeah, my life is very different now. I mean, I miss working in the Obama White House, but no, I don't miss the Washington culture, and I don't miss those badges. And that said, I had a blue badge. I had a great badge. Gave me access everywhere. I had a hard pin. And at the end of the day, it's like you just kind of get sick of, wearing your access around your neck and being judged on that.
Do you work at home now and just write?
Yeah. What's your next book?
It won't be set in Washington, which I'm happy to report. And I don't know, I'm working on it now while trying to wrap up the first book tour.
So you have the book tour. You have your dog.
I know where you're going.
No, I'm not going there. I want to know about writer's block, because if you work at home, which I do,
with a dog,
Christina, with a dog, the dog distracts me. But I sometimes find it hard to be disciplined in my writing if I'm at home.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out. I wrote that whole first book while I had a full-time job, more than full-time. So I think I will get a job once my schedule settles down. And I don't know what it'll be, but I definitely work better when I have multiple irons in the fire. And I need to also be talking to other people, because that's just way too much time in my own head.
Weird fun fact. Before I had my first child, I was a writer. I'd left journalism. I was writing, and I'd spent 8 hours a day trying to write. And then I had our first child, and I thought, this will kill my writing career. Virginia Woolf, it's, all over. And then when you only have 3 hours a day to write, oh my gosh, do you get effective.
Exactly.
It's really true that you need...
I was teaching at university, and I had a baby, but I had to get up early before the baby and work.
Right.
And
which is like at 3 a.m. But anyway, but Beck, but you're happy now?
It feels like more of a gift.
You have a nice person in your life?
A nice boyfriend?
No. I have dogs in my life. I go to the dog park every day. But that's kind of where I am right now. It feels pretty good.
You know what? I prefer dogs at this point.
But you're not 30.
No, that's true.
You don't want to have puppies.
I do. I don't rule it out.
All right, Beck. Well, thanks for writing such an amazing book. Congratulations. And it really was a fulfillment of your dream. The working in the White House was an unexpected dream, but the writing of the book, congratulations. It was a really great read.
Thank you.
And thank you for it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that was fun.
She's darling.
She is. But you say everybody is darling.
True. I do. And this is
because
the problem.
Maybe we only have darling guests on.
Well, we have very, very fine guests, but I'm very impressionable. I was in Portland. I think I became a vegan, and I used to love steak, but it was just the environment, and it influences me. And anyway, I do find her enchanting. And sometimes I dread having to read a book. It's a sign that I didn't necessarily pick myself. And I love this. I downloaded it on Audible and used it for my walks with Izzy, and I was enchanted.
It was really, really good. Okay, so you were away last week, so we're getting this big buildup of listener response, and we've gone on long today, so we'll only do a couple. But just to remind you, we love hearing from you, and you can reach us most easily at contact@femsplainers.com. Just shoot us a note, or you can find us on Twitter at Femsplainers, at Facebook at Femsplainers, and on Instagram at Femsplainers Podcast.
May I say one thing?
Obviously.
Please go, if you're on iTunes, and it helps so much if you will write a little note. But if that's too much, and frankly, I've never written little notes because I'm afraid.
You just mean a rating or a comment?
Just give us 5 stars. Now, if you're one of my hate followers, don't do this. Do not go there because... Ignore.
No, what's weird is that we get a lot of feedback on, especially Twitter, like, I hate iTunes. Is there somewhere else we can listen to it? Yeah, it's on pretty much every podcast platform, but we promote iTunes because apparently that's the thing that you have to do when you do podcasts. You
Just
want
fill
to
in the
you want to
5
trend
stars and then get out.
iTunes.
That's all. Okay, that's all I ask.
Yeah, that's all you have to do. Okay, so we heard back. Do you remember we did our lullaby for Lisa?
Did she like it?
Oh, she loved it. She reached out to us and She thanked us for the personal lullaby. She said it was an unexpected performance. She said, on a more serious note, I believe the podcasts are so important. They bring together curious topics, a variety of opinions, and most importantly, include a sense of humor. But she says, I miss this lively debate amongst peers. I have it with my 3 offspring, she says. And I do blame the AFT. What is the AFT?
AFT?
No,
The American Federation of Teachers.
No, the AFT.
I don't blame them. I like it.
I think she means the era of Trump. The more the old school Republicans engage with moderate Democrats, the greater the chance of keeping the sane debate alive. I know you try to keep politics out of the podcasts, but so far you've handled the subtle inclusion beautifully. Well, thank you.
And we try to do that because we feel that way. And I keep changing because of where I am and who's around me.
and depending how many glasses of champagne you've had.
I know. I don't know. I think I become the opposite.
You never become belligerent.
The opposite. No, I think I become more accepting. Like,
Go for it.
But there are moments. Did you ever see Volunteers with John Candy? And he's abducted. He's there with the Peace Corps, and he's all.
Oh yes, when he's abducted by Canadians.
No, well, possibly by Canadian communists, North Koreans.
Right.
And then they brainwash him, and then he comes back with chants pro North Korea, pro the communists, and that happens to me sometimes.
We'll take you to Canada. Okay, this is very funny. So listeners will know that we now have Zoe in the studio, the wonderful Zoe. Before Zoe, we had Isaac, and we talked to him about getting engaged. So listen to this, what I got through Instagram. It said, "You are great. Probably your biggest fan from Slovenia."
Oh,
was that a Slovenian accent? I don't know. But what is your Isaac's username on Instagram?
What is he like?
Oh, he was
cute
kind of
Isaac
popular, except
Isaac-
he's taken.
And it's good that he's not here because he might outshine us.
Well, no, but we could jeopardize. No, we couldn't jeopardize his engagement. But fortunately, he's not on Instagram, so I had to tell her that. Okay, but we can do more feedback next week. We'd love it, especially now that we're with E1, and maybe we'll get wider audience, wider circulation, more viewpoints.
Very excited to be with E1 and welcome your comments. And you can follow us on Twitter. You can be on Facebook, all the venues. Send your questions, reactions, and we will try to answer.
All right. Well, great to have you back, Christina. I missed you. I hope your mom's okay.
I'm going back in a week and a half. I didn't tell you that.
Uh-oh. Right. All right. We're going to record. We're going to record a bunch of shows before you go away. And thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.